In achieving sustainability and mitigating climate change, today's scientists face many challenges, from harvesting solar energy to purifying water and more. The solutions to these challenges exist in living organisms all around us. Here to explain, we have James Yoreo and David Baker. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So Jim, as we talk about these challenges, where in living organisms do we find the solutions?
A large variety of living organisms that do exactly the things that you just described. All organisms have to deal with water, and there are specialized proteins that allow organisms to take water in, and they're able to transport water without transporting even small ions and even protons. Solar energy harvesting, well, obviously, leaves are doing it all around us, but bacterial systems have light harvesting complexes, and these are quite intricate structures that really are an inspiration for material scientists to think about the ability of organisms to take CO2 and turn it into hard materials. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for lessons about what we can do technologically to achieve the same outcome.
So David, what's prevented humans from mimicking these proteins so far?
Up until recently, we didn't have any ways of making new proteins, but in the last few years, we've gotten quite good at designing brand new proteins from scratch. Proteins in nature carry out all these amazing functions. They evolved over hundreds of millions or billions of years. So we face new problems in the world today. We live longer, so neurodegenerative diseases are important. We have new problems in the environment, like breaking down plastic. If we had a lot of time to wait, then new proteins would undoubtedly arise that are very good at breaking down plastic, for example. But that can take a very, very long time.
Right.
Exciting thing now about protein design is that we can design new proteins, in a matter of weeks that could solve these problems.
So you've been able to design these proteins from scratch. How is that possible?
Proteins in nature are encoded in the genomes of all living things. So we have about 30,000 different proteins in us. Each one is encoded by a different gene. Plants have proteins in them that carry out photosynthesis that are encoded in genes in those plants. So basically what we do is we come up with a new protein to solve a problem, like breaking down plastic. We design a gene which encodes that new protein, and then we put that gene into a bacteria or a yeast cell, and that bacterium then becomes a factory for making the protein, and we can get it out and see what it does.
That's amazing. Now, Jim, once you've designed these proteins, how do you put them to use in terms of harvesting solar energy or purifying our water?
There is certainly a long path to go down to get from having the protein to applying it in technology. What David and I have been doing is really doing the front-end experimentation to say, do these proteins do what we wanted them to do? Do they mineralize carbonate? And when they do, then we really are faced with the question, okay, well now, how do we actually apply this? How do we take this protein that we've made? Now I can understand why it works. Can I just make something completely synthetic, some polymer that will achieve the same thing and then just deploy it? If you want to deploy it as a protein, now you have to do it in organisms. That now raises a whole new set of challenges in environment. Are you going to put new genes into organisms to produce those proteins and perform that action on their own? In the work that we've done to date, we found that the quantities of proteins or protein-like molecules that you need in order to get pretty big effects is small. And so, there is some hope that you could have some kind of offline processing. Let me take an example of pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. Well, pulling out of air, is a very difficult thing to do. Even plants aren't very good at it. Pulling out of seawater is a much easier thing to do because of the state that CO2 is in seawater. So you could imagine a plant where seawater comes in and goes back out because you don't need that much of the active proteins. But still, we are a long way from taking these ideas and putting them in the field.
But it's an exciting step for sure.
I think there are a lot of applications which are really, really interesting. I think understanding the principles, which is what Jim and I have focused on to date, is really interesting. But I think what I'm most excited about are the applications I can't quite imagine yet, because I know they're there. And that's certainly happened in the past as we've gotten better at designing new things. There are new possibilities that open up, and those are always the most exciting ones. But I can't tell you what they are because I don't know yet.
Well, actually, it's worth going back to how David and I started working together. I remember the first time that I went over to his lab and I gave a little talk to some members of your group who were interested in biomineralization. And the conversation we had was, let's figure out how to reproduce the miracle of collagen. Collagen is the stuff that makes bones. It self-assembles into a three-dimensional structure, and then it causes the formation of individual crystallites into an organized pattern. We don't want to make calcium phosphate necessarily like collagen, but imagine if we could create a self-assembling three-dimensional architecture that made p-doped and n-doped, p-type and n-type semiconductors. And now you're no longer limited to 2D lithography to make microchips, but you essentially can make them in 3 dimensions, and just the amount of memory that you can get, or computing power, goes up dramatically. That's way off in the future, but in principle, there's no reason why it can't be done.
Yeah, and I think that problem of bottom-up self-assembly of circuits, things like transistors, I think is a super interesting problem now. Stepping back a bit, the materials that we have in nature, like tooth and bone and shells, are kind of remarkable materials. But now imagine that we completely master those principles. You can describe any material made out of calcium carbonate or calcium phosphate in any shape. Proteins, imagine something, you can make tooth-like materials, but in any kind of shape. You can imagine all the different functions. These principles, they don't have to be applied to calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate. You can apply them to all sorts of semiconductor materials to get kinds of materials that don't exist in nature or anything that we're familiar with now, for things like next generation computing devices and so forth.
Yeah, definitely a lot to look forward to. Thank you so much. You want more MatSci? Well, don't go anywhere. Click right here to watch all of our content from the 2025 MRS Spring Meeting. Have fun.